So Stats SA last week resumed face-to-face fieldwork for the last leg of the pilot census. Fieldworkers will visit sampled households to complete the pilot questionnaire, which started during lockdown level 4. And now the pilot census is a dress rehearsal, if you like, for the main census, which is planned for next year. However, the country's COVID-19 pandemic and elections may delay the next census to some time next year. Luqmaan Omar is the acting census pilot director, joins us now via our video link. Luqmaan, great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for making time for us here on the AM Report. For those perhaps far removed from the story as things stand, when we speak about field work, what exactly does that entail?
Thank you. Good morning, Ayanda. Good morning to your listeners. Stats SA is currently undergoing its last leg of the pilot phase, and we actually started on the 3rd of July. With remote collection via telephone and web. The last part will be actual face-to-face interviews in person. We are going to 1,080 enumeration areas, or you could call it suburbs, approximately 160,000 structures with just under 500,000 people projected to be counted. We are, as the last leg, we have offered the opportunity for households to be counted via web and telephone. And in this phase, we are testing the process of ensuring that in-person interviewing could be allowed for those that actually permit it.
The last census we did in this country, correct me if I'm wrong, was in 2011. At that time, around 60 million people in South Africa were officially counted, for lack of a better term. How urgent is it that we hold the census next year, keeping in mind, of course, how different the terrain is? For one, we're dealing with a deadly pandemic.
Okay, yes, correct. The last democratic census was in 2011. In the actual preceding years, we've been undertaking mid-year estimates. And estimates, by their very nature, are estimates. We need direct collection because the census numbers actually provide key policy numbers, direct where the funding should be and where allocation of key service delivery variables and information is made available. Despite these challenging conditions, there is a dearth of data, and a lot of estimates have been done. Hence, it's vital that we actually carry out this task and count everyone, every house, every person in the country.
You speak about funding, concerns being raised in the weeks gone by that funding shortages specifically for Stats SA may hamper on its work to do its job. How big a concern is that as you plan for what is undoubtedly a big project next year?
Funding is a large issue. Stats SA has resourced and worked through with National Treasury via a long standing agreement. More so, the key issue is the census by its very nature requires massive resources, technological resources and human. We estimate approximately 165,000 field workers will be recruited. With the past census and the funding that we had allocated in 2011, Treasury has allocated us similar amounts, and so we effectively have to do things differently. And hence why, one of the main reasons why this is a digital census. We intend to use tablets, we intend to use technology to actually make it easier, simpler, better and faster for us to collect our information and count everything and everyone that matters in the country.
How much money are we talking here, Luqmaan, roughly speaking, not only with the census gone by, but especially with this one coming ahead, given the unique challenges?
Okay, so the census funding, the full program is approximately about 3 billion rand, but this is over many years, and it forms part of actual preparatory activities, testing, and getting ready. The bulk of the funding, however, is actually spent on salaries, close on to 65 to 70%. Salaries for field workers that we recruit. So effectively, when we hit the ground, the intention is to recruit the 165,000 people. And if I may, I can also www.statssa.gov.za. I can request prospective field workers to register themselves. There's the HR system there where we allow people to locally register themselves with geolocation and we can allow them to be actually brought on board as field workers in this regard.
Okay, so you're still recruiting field workers. That's a good message to send out for those who are interested. I'm also interested in what conducting the census digitally actually entails and means. For one, working with statistics, there's a concept of a confidence interval. Essentially, for those who aren't aware, that speaks to how confident you are that the data at your disposal is accurate. Does conducting the census digitally change the confidence interval that we're working with?
Not really, and that's one of the reasons we do these multitudes of tests. We've undertaken 2 or 3 large mini tests. We are undertaking this pilot to give us that level of confidence. The Stats Council has also said they want to make sure that we are getting the right numbers coming through. And this is why, again, we're doing these dress rehearsals. But if I look at current international norms and standards, 6 days ago, Australia just conducted its census in similar digital means. About 25 days ago, Ghana concluded its census, also using tablets, similar methods in which we have done. They have about half the population as us, but they actually had a shorter period. Nonetheless, they successfully counted and collected. The key interest with the digital census is getting better quality data quicker. In the previous censuses, we had mass amounts of paper. We had close on to, if I remember correctly, hundreds and millions of pages of paper that took us months and years to process. And in this time around, we want it to be a paperless census. We want to make it accessible to citizens in the country. We want to allow people multiple channels of collection via telephone, web, and in person, face-to-face. So we want to get better quality data in the end.
Yeah. Now that you are making this more accessible to ordinary civilians, for lack of a better term, does that mean we can also expect better qualitative data than just quantitative data from Stats SA?
By its very nature, Stats SA has no taste buds. So we effectively report what is on the ground. We report factually. And as such, it's up to the policymakers to then expand and extrapolate on what this actually means. So when we count how many children are born in a respective year, or we indicate the actual numbers per province, the actual implementation of taking that policy measure into either a funding mechanism or service delivery process is done via the policymakers, the actual municipalities. So yes, in virtue of the end product, but Stats SA does not pronounce in terms of the qualitative data, largely in that regard.
Fair enough. You've made reference to this being a dress rehearsal, what's taken place essentially in the week gone by. I wonder what challenges that's presented to you and how those challenges are made even more complex by the prospect of an election later this year or perhaps next year, and of course the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, so the COVID-19 pandemic has made things a bit more difficult, especially with the alert levels. It's quite difficult to allow field workers to go into the field. At the same time, we do not want to risk and make the actual census collection a super spreader event. And hence, we have these multiple waves of collection. The first wave, which was, for example, in the dress rehearsal, wave 1 and 2 with web and telephonic interviewing. And the last one when there are actually lower alert levels for which we then conduct face-to-face collection. In terms of the local government elections, we do have engagements with the IEC to ensure that 2 large-scale projects do not run themselves concurrently in the field. Most importantly, to make sure that we do not play in the same space. The census, by its very nature, is a state project, and it's very important to the country as a whole to measure itself so it can manage itself in its growth trajectory. So we make sure that we do not play in that space. With the IEC, I think as they decide or as the competent court decides in terms of when the census will be, Stats SA will then gazette and follow through via cabinet decision in terms of when the main census will be scheduled. Thank you.
Incredibly important story. Thanks very much indeed for breaking it down for us. Appreciate your time. Luqmaan Omar is Stats SA's Acting Census Project Director. Once again, Luqmaan, thanks very much indeed.